hopefully they'll join us shortly. But thanks everybody for joining in this morning. My name is Corey Kersley. I'm the Executive Director for the Sherwood Chamber of Commerce, and our partner with the city is Bruce Coleman, who's also on the call today. He's the Economic Development Manager for the city. And this is our fourth session of our Small Business and Entrepreneur Education Sessions series. And we'll be doing one a month for, it started in July, so we'll go all the way through June of 2021. And we especially appreciate Metro, who provided a grant for us to allow us to do this, as well as Banner Bank and their sponsorship. Both of their contributions allow us to hold these sessions and not have to charge anyone for participating. So we really appreciate their input. So given the number of folks that we have on the call, I think at this point we'll forego doing introductions with all of our participants, and I think I'll turn it over to Shannon Mitchell from Banner Bank and let her briefly introduce our panel and kind of give us a brief overview of what we hope to accomplish today. And then as folks, if you have questions throughout, if you want to speak up or maybe in the chat, maybe just, if you're comfortable doing it, you can give us a brief overview of who you are and why you're here, and if you have any particular goals out of the session. Otherwise, yeah, let's go ahead. We'll turn it over to Shannon and begin. Shannon, I can't hear you. I don't know if that's everybody. It doesn't hear you either. No. Yeah, you've suddenly gone dark. Okay.
It's amazing technology that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about now?
Hey, there we go.
Hey.
Okay, sorry about that. You've got to love technology these days. My apologies. So thank you, Corey. As Corey mentioned, I'm Shannon Mitchell, Vice President and Business Banking Team Lead with Banner Bank. I have 10 years of banking experience and currently lead a team of business bankers who specialize in tailoring solutions to their clients' needs. My colleagues and I serve clients by getting to know them and understanding their needs and challenges of their business. I mentor and lead our team of business bankers by example, while collaborating with fellow experts at Banner Bank to offer the right blend of tools and solutions at hand. I continually look forward to assisting businesses as they aim to expand, retool, and grow their operations. It may sound corny, but there's nothing better than helping a business owner accomplish their goals and dreams through financial education and support. Joining me today for this great commercial real estate panel discussion, we have three local commercial real estate experts: Eleanor Ashoff with McAdam Forbes, Brian Norton of CBRE, and Kelsey Schneider from Cressida. In that order, why don't you each give us a brief introduction of what you specialize in, and maybe just a little bit about what you like about being in commercial real estate. Eleanor?
Hi, thank you. Good morning. I'm Eleanor Ashoff. I work with McAdam Forbes. McAdam Forbes is a locally owned commercial real estate brokerage firm with 42 years of specializing in sales and leasing of industrial and office properties throughout the Portland metro area, as well as Clark County. I have been with McAdam Forbes since I started real estate 12 years ago, and my specialty is industrial properties, so sale, leasing, investments throughout Portland, and I'm licensed both in Washington and Oregon, and work both with buyers and sellers. And your question about why I like real estate so much. I think what I love about industrial real estate is you see where things are made and how they're distributed, logistics, distribution, wholesale, everything that touches our lives on a daily basis. And sometimes we don't think about. As an industrial broker, I get to see behind the scenes. I get to meet the people who are doing it, the people who come up with the idea to do it, and help them with their company's needs to grow. Sometimes they need to take a step back and reduce their footprint. Sometimes they're opening up a second location. But that's what I love about it, is I love to see how our larger community works. And that's what industrial real estate does for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. Brian?
Good morning. That's great, Eleanor. Tough act to follow there. Well done. Brian Norton with CBRE. CBRE is actually the world's largest real estate company. We have offices globally in every specialty. I'm particularly in the healthcare real estate world. So primarily my clients are going to be physicians or medical office building property owners. So tenants and landlords in that arena. So medical specialty has its own little niche and very, very specific to the healthcare world. And I've been doing that for 17 years. And well, why the question of what's exciting about what I do? I forget what the question was. I love what I do. Working with doctors is really interesting to me. I've worked with them my whole career, and they're very good partners for me because they typically are very good at what they do. Be it surgery or dentistry or whatever that is. But the chances are if they had a business class in all of their education, that'd be pretty rare. So we get pulled in a lot for all types of business decision-making, connections in our business world, and they like to rely on the experts that their friends have, referred to them. So that's what I enjoy about actually being able to help a client from point A to point B and through that process. And plus I don't have to work on the weekends, so.
That's always a perk. Thank you, Brian. Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Schneider. I'm a advisor at Cressa, and Cressa is also a worldwide company, and we are the world's largest tenant rep exclusive firm. So we only work with businesses like yourselves and never represent landlords. So that makes us conflict free, and your business is always top of mind. And my background before being an advisor is actually property management. So I worked on the landlord side as well, and really seen the background of what goes into running a property and keeping it intact for tenants and working with the tenants along their side to make sure that they're successful. So I've seen both sides, and my specialty then is really tenant rep, like I mentioned, but I've also done, I've done office, industrial, and medical, so kind of ranged. And I've done tours with both Eleanor and Brian.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Kelsey. So today we'll be having an interactive panel discussion, as Corey mentioned, around best practices for what to consider when looking to move from a home office to a commercial space and they're within. How you as a business owner should be prepared for this process. We will also be sharing information about the different types of lease structure and offer thoughts of how to determine leasing a commercial space versus purchasing. Please keep in mind that we hope that this is fully interactive, so feel free to ask questions throughout. You can either physically raise your hand on video or just jump in and ask a question. If no one asks questions, we'll periodically between the questions ask if the audience does have any questions. I would like to remind everyone, if you are not speaking, please place yourself on mute so we can limit background noise. Otherwise, we are also recording this and it will be posted on the Sherwood Chamber website hereafter. So with that, let's jump right in. Why don't we go ahead and do somewhat of a snake order and start with Eleanor, then follow the same order. So Eleanor, Brian, Kelsey, and then we'll go Kelsey, Brian, Eleanor on the following question. So with that, question number 1, what are the benefits to working with a commercial real estate broker, and how should a business owner identify who they work with?
So good questions. They're always the first questions that are really good. My thought is that there's 3 things. It'll save you time, it'll save you money, and ideally it will help you avoid pitfalls and frustration that can come with finding or securing a new location. And what do I mean by that is, I think today we've become a culture, and especially with the pandemic, of shopping online. Everyone has access to information. There are websites. There are multiple websites on real estate out there. But the problem is finding a location and negotiating a lease or a sale are almost 2 different things. It's very easy to find one. You can kind of read the stats on any website. When you get into the negotiations, using a professional, a commercial real estate broker who's specializing in your product need, we do this every day, and we learn from our own lessons. We see the pitfalls that people make around negotiating leases, what the current rates might be, where the concessions are. And so, I feel like that is a huge value add to a tenant or to a prospect looking. Ultimately we will save you money because we'll know where the concessions are, whether it's a couple months free, whether it's a little bit of a lower rate, push on the landlord a little more. And then finally and this is a little bit more on the sales side, but also on the mainly in the industrial, we see this a lot, is around zoning. Is that my feedback on that, or is that someone else's? If it's mine, I can adjust, but anyway. Zoning, occupancy, those are all important things that the city worries about, and it's not always top of mind for a tenant or a buyer. And we spend a lot of time working with municipalities. So I'll leave it at that and let my colleagues answer theirs. But those are my 3 reasons. Brian, up to you.
Yeah, that was a perfect answer. I pass. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, yeah, for all those points as well, we're also a professional service. So if you're, for example, a business owner, or in my case, I work, like I said, with medical groups. So if you're hiring, a lawyer, to do your legal, you're going to hire a CPA, you're going to hire a real estate broker. There's no reason why you would skip that step. The same reason that you wouldn't go out and buy a house without a real estate agent. We bring expertise in hundreds and hundreds of transactions with clients, so that we can point out problems, we can guide, consult, and we do all those services as if you're going out and leasing a space, free of charge for you as the tenant. So, you're getting, what other service professional will work with you for 100 to 600 hours and not charge you or not send you a bill? So, sort of no brainer in my mind, but it's definitely not always clear in the public's eyes. I have, like Eleanor said, I have the internet today. It's 2020. I can Google search anything I want, but the fact of the matter is, the more technology we have, the more of a need there is for a broker to be involved, so that they can kind of sift through and tell you, actually, the building that you just fell in love with on Google or LoopNet or wherever you found it just sold. So sorry. So let's, it's better to rely on a person who you can trust and who you like working with. It's just not always black and white, like the zebras on my shirt here. In real estate, you can't just Google the answer to your question. What is the market value of my property? You can't find that answer without working with a professional.
Okay, it's me. So to add to that, and also I think the second part of that question was how to choose the broker you would want to use. So I can touch on that one a little bit more. But to the why, we really do have that market intel. We'll know the landlords and the players and the other tenants very well. We'll know what kind of deals have happened in the building you're interested in, and we can use that to negotiate for you very effectively. So there's that. And then how to choose someone. I think it's very important that you trust the broker that you're working with, and that you interview around and you network and get recommendations and find someone that you connect with and you feel like they'll have your best interests at heart.
Can I answer one more thing? Not to dominate this question, but two things. Like, so going back to what Kelsey said, which is really important, is when you're picking a broker, is also look at specialties and locations. You know, if you're a doctor or a dentist, call Brian. He does, I don't know how many hundreds of medical deals every year. He knows what's out there. He knows what's available. He knows the pricing. If you're, doing industrial, call McAdam Forbes, call us. If you're office or you just want a sheer tenant rep, call Kelsey. It is having that person who knows the area and knows what you're looking for, again, is so important. And then I'm going to highlight one point kind of down in the weeds on why, the value that brokers bring is when you're negotiating a lease, the HVAC, right? Your HVAC system, and this comes a lot in industrial, you're inheriting that HVAC system. And most landlords will put that price on you as a tenant if that HVAC, that unit on the roof dies at 15-year-old degree unit, and that's a $15,000 cost or up or down from there. And most brokers have run into that a number of times, that we know how to negotiate around that to save you from inheriting someone else's problem. And it's just little nuances like that that most people don't even think about. They don't read the boilerplate in the lease, and bang, 2 years into their lease, the HVAC unit goes out because it's 20 years old, and you get a bill from the landlord. So that's just one thought, one example, but there's many of those, and I'm sure we could all talk to them, but we'll move on.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eleanor, Kelsey, and Brian. Those are all really good points. So Kelsey, what are the top 3 initiatives that a business owner should consider when enlisting the services of a commercial real estate broker?
I think number 1 would be timing. Timing is so key. You want to start early, so 12 to 18 months before you actually want to move in to a place and be in there, I would start looking and reaching out to someone. Number 2, finding your broker that you want to use. And number 3, really getting a game plan with your team. Sit down with your team and actually talk to your group, know what your program includes, as far as like how many offices, like how much square footage you think you might need, where do you want to be, is parking important, all those sorts of things. It's just good for you guys to talk about that before you really even get started.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Kelsey, what she said there? You mentioned the timing, and a year to 18 months is ideal. Can you speak to that a little bit about why that's important? I would imagine that, especially for somebody that might be a home-based business, that maybe they're thinking to get out and rent a space, I would imagine they want to be in 6 months or 3 months, not necessarily a year and a half. So one, can that be done? And 2, in an ideal world, why is it so important to have more time?
Sure. Yeah. So the length of time kind of leverages your negotiation power, and really just the fact that you can look around and make sure that you're choosing the right space for you. It also gives time for construction if there's any TIs needed in your space, and etc. But to your point, with a smaller user, that may not be necessary, and 6 months is completely doable. If you only need, 2 offices or something, you can move right in and maybe there's no work that needs to be done. So it does depend on the scope of your actual need, for sure.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. Brian?
Yeah, I'll dovetail on Kelsey's 3 points would be plan, just to keep it really easy to remember. Plan, and plan would be my 3, because basically our job is to, as a real estate broker, is to come in, listen to the client's needs. Everyone has a very specific need, even if you're just an office user or just a retail tenant. Everyone's so dramatically different that we spend a lot of time on the front end just literally listening and asking questions so that we can then identify, well, first of all, are we a good fit? I mean, if I'm talking to like 24-hour fitness or something, and pretty soon I'll discover that I may not be the best broker for them. So we're going to get down into the specific, detailed needs with the client. Versus, how they'll just call you on the phone and then say, can we look at this space? I saw, there was a sign up. Respectfully, no, we're going to have a conversation before we go out and waste your time in particularly. We don't want to waste anyone's time when you can sit with a client for 1 hour and pretty much learn all about their goals, their long-term strategy, and their exit strategy. We do a ton of due diligence on the front end so that we're not going out there making everyone look bad and especially letting our clients down. So even with COVID, it's helped us to really manage our time better with clients so that, every minute counts. This is a long process no matter what. If you're moving out of a home, relocating, buying a building, like Kelsey said, I mean, you could even add another 6 months to our timeline typically for that relocation process. And I think the 2 things that clients underestimate are the time it takes to relocate. And secondly, the cost involved in relocation. So before we go out looking at spaces and falling in love, we want to really define the cash flow, budgets, timeline, permitting, everything that's going to come up in the process, we already know in advance. So why not educate the client first before we step out, drive in the car, run around town and, accomplish nothing. So pretty much just planning. I think the first step in that is hiring your team of professionals. If you don't have a good real estate lawyer, make a phone call, just connect, have a relationship with one and put them on your team. You're not going to hopefully rack up, $30,000 bill with them, but you might need them to review your lease. So just rather than, looking on, and again, back to Google, real estate attorneys in Portland, get to know one or ask us for a referral to one. And then all of a sudden, when you're ready, you need your CPA and you need your lawyer. It's going to be a painless process versus, literally a painful process. We want to make this process as painless as possible because trust me, moving is not easy. And if you ever moved a house or moved houses or apartments or certainly office space and certainly medical office space, it is quite the process. So we want to dial it in.
Thank you. Eleanor, do you have anything additional to add here?
Not much. I'll leave it with more of a quote and then define it. These 2 did a very good job. My colleagues did a very good job, but it's, dig your well before you need the water. And I agree. It's planning, it's being ahead of it. I think if you put a reminder, it is more maybe for a company that's already in an office space or in an industrial space or in a medical space. If you put a reminder at about a year out from when your lease is going to expire to review your lease, understand what your options are, understand when your landlord is going to start putting that space up for lease again. And then, plan, look at what your needs are. In my world with industrial, with logistics and distributors, they don't need as much leeway because, 3 to 6 months is usually plenty because everything's palletized. All they do is load it in a truck and move it. But if you're a manufacturer, if you are an office user, if you're medical and dental, highly complicated build out, you need more time, budget. I would again say budget is everything. Know where your budget is, know your stretch budget, know your ideal budget. Be as upfront with your broker and your team. I mean, I think what I find a lot is you start working with someone, it's like an onion. Each layer you get more information, you know, and I realized sometimes if I'd gotten all that information at once, it would have made things just move much faster. So really trust the team you build and really work with them, knowing that they're on your side. We don't have alternative, you know, ulterior motives. We're really out there to help you succeed and to get that deal done.
Is this a good time for me to ask a question too? Okay, so as you know, I do economic development for the city of Sherwood, and in my past experience, I've always
Shannon,
worked
are
very
you
closely.
talking?
Oh, you can't hear me.
Yes.
We can hear you, Bruce. I think Eleanor is having a bit of a delay on her Wi-Fi. So Bruce,
Oh.
go ahead with your question.
Okay, so as economic development manager for the city of Sherwood, I work really closely with brokers both here and in other cities and other states. And I just would love your feedback, because we work with businesses in the community that may be looking for assistance. We're not brokers. We'll let people know about opportunities, but we're not going to negotiate leases or anything of that sort, obviously. But I'd like to get your feedback in terms of how you would like maybe our city, but any city, to work with you to support the growth of business in a community. That may be too general a question, but just want to make sure that we know the ground rules that you're looking for as to how we as a city can support your work, so that we as a community can continue to grow business.
I have a thought on that. I think that it would be helpful if maybe you built like a directory of, oh, sorry, I thought I was going out or something. A directory of brokers that we could write a bio or something and say what we specialize in and provide our email or whatever. And then they could you could give that to them. They could reach out to whoever they want. Something
Sounds
like
good.
I'll jump in. I think that's a great question. Just the fact that you even are here and Shannon's working with you guys and making this kind of thing happen is huge in my mind as far as being proactive with the city. To be honest, I think a lot of the other cities are lacking in that department. You know, no offense to them. It's just I don't think proactivity is the right word to use. And so I think just asking the question, I mean, putting a business owner in touch with a good real estate agent, I don't think you need to be too complicated about every individual and there's a lot of brokers in town. But if you put them in touch with a good one, they're going to get that client into the right hands. So I think if you had 2 or 3 brokers that you really trust, that you could say, hey, just talk to them. If they'll be honest with you. If they're not the best fit, they'll put you with the best fit. And I'm putting a lot of trust in our brokerage community to do that, and not just say, you know, maybe just run with that business in hopes that they get a quick deal out of it. That's not the mentality that I'm talking about.
And at the risk of sounding self-serving, you can always call the chamber too. We have relationships, and there are members and even some that aren't members, but we also have real estate agents. Angie Ford, is on the call today, and she's an agent and a member of the chamber, and she's been around for a long time. And though I don't think she specializes in commercial real estate. If she doesn't, she probably knows other agents that do, and she could be a good source as well.
Exactly. Thank you, Corey. Eleanor,
I would agree.
do you have anything to add there?
Well, I was just going to pretty much agree with what Brian said and what Kelsey said. I think, Bruce, thank you, and the chamber for putting this together. And I think, these type of bridges just help everyone. It helps the whole community. I think, it's really up to, and with commercial, I think most of us are up to date with different incentives each of the cities offer to help small businesses, store
Hey, Eleanor, can you?
Loans, and just having those touch points. And I always look at that as the onus of the broker working in those areas to really know that. But going back to you, Bruce, never heard shoot
Eleanor,
out
if you
a
wanna-
blast
if you
email to brokers in that say, hey, just reminding, we have these great incentives to move companies to Sherwood, because that's in, yeah.
Hey, Eleanor, we're having a hard time hearing you with Wi-Fi. If you want to go ahead and click the settings button and then dial in from your phone and mute your computer. There's a long delay, but go ahead and just mute your computer and then dial in with your participant ID under the settings tab. That should work. So with that, while Eleanor gets logged back in, thank you again for the great questions. This is fantastic. Does anyone else have any additional questions before we continue on with kind of our planned Q&A session? I did see a question in the chat as well from Evan, I believe. Sorry about that, Evan. I can go ahead and share these in the chat, no problem with you. They will just kind of go line for line. So there are some that we may not get to depending on our time commitment today. So any questions? I'll pause for a moment. No? Okay, perfect. So moving on, question number 3. What type of expectations should a business owner have when working with a commercial real estate broker? Brian, do you want to kick that off for us?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Expectations for a commercial real estate broker. Well, I think back to client service. I mean, if you're a business owner, you're going to want, this is quite a process, like I said, so you're going to want to look for somebody who you enjoy working with, who is very experienced in what you're looking to accomplish, and then also who listens to what you're looking for. A broker who has a particular space in mind for you and just shows you that one and says, well, that's kind of all that's out there in the market, is probably one who is not a good fit for you. You want someone who's going to really lay out the strategy for how this process looks like, rather than just giving you a little glimpse of it and kind of holding it close to them. They're going to be open about sharing with you. So we've gathered all the properties in the market that could fit you. We'd like to have a discussion about narrowing that down so we can refine your needs better in our minds, so that we can get in your shoes and go that direction further. So it's a step-by-step process, and it's really important to get that right broker on board early. Spend the time with them, because too often we start working with a client who says, I had a really bad experience with my past broker, and that's really a disappointing thing. I'm sorry that has happened. So make sure it's a good fit first. I think that's doable with a 1-minute conversation up to an hour. Within an hour max, you should know if that broker is going to have your best interest at hand.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kelsey?
Yeah. So I think that as far as expectations that you should have a broker that's responsive. That's something that you should expect, that if you ask a question, that they're able to get back to you in a timely manner. They answer your calls, your emails, that sort of thing. They're professional. They know how to communicate what the process is. They're able to think outside of the box. If your need is something that like you think it should be one way, well, maybe they're able to give you an alternative, something like that. Yeah, someone who has your best interest.
Perfect, that's great. And Eleanor, are you back with sound? No. Okay, so Eleanor, if you want to click on the spinning wheel on the right-hand side of your computer that says computer and audio settings, it should, if you click, okay, yeah, anyways, if you click on that, you should be able to dial in with the meeting room number and the participant ID. So I guess we'll just continue onward for the sake of the audience. Brian, leasing commercial real estate versus purchasing. When to lease and when to buy? Just kind of an open-ended question there.
Yes, I love this question. I would say that let's say I had 10 clients. Of those 10, I would say in conversation, probably 9 out of 10 desire to buy a building for multiple reasons. They think it's, it's just like buying a home. You should own your building. And that's a great point. And ideally, yes, you would. But out of those 90% who want to buy a building, I would say only 10% end up doing it. So the question is, first of all, and I'm not shy to ask the question is, do you have any money? Because you're going to have money to buy a building. And some people think that, just because they're paying $3,000 in rent and it's killing them, they should be paying that to themselves, that they think it's just easy to go out and buy a building. It's not. It's not like going to buy a house. It's not like going to Target to buy something off the shelf. It is quite a process. Supply is extremely limited, especially for smaller buildings. Most of my clients aren't looking for 200,000 square feet, 30 to $50 million buildings. Most of the clients that I work with are small businesses looking for a 2,000 square foot building to maybe a 10,000 square foot building. So one of the questions I just asked is, how much money do you have set aside for a down payment? And if they say, well, I have $10,000 in savings, I don't want to wipe that out and then all of a sudden you buy a building, even if you could, because if you need the money, you can't get it out. It's in the building. So just a quick test of, do you have 10% or do you have 20% set aside for a building purchase is kind of a quick test. And if they don't, we just kind of move on and focus more on leasing.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that's a great example. And just again, as kind of a comment from the banker in the room, that is very much a huge perspective across the board. A lot of clients, same thing, think that they should be paying themselves those lease payments instead of continuing to pay their landlord or the property management company that they're leasing from. But that said, again, if you don't have the significant amount of cash injection, then it's going to be really hard to make that happen. So it's great to hear that from a broker perspective, you guys do consult your clients and educate them from that perspective. Kelsey, I know that you're completely tenant representation. So when you are looking at and working with your clients, how do you go about navigating that as well?
Yeah, so I would say we have clients that are looking to buy as well. So buy or lease. And when they're looking to buy, we usually ask them, do you really want to get into the real estate business? Because you buying a building makes you're a landlord at that point, and you have to keep this building up, and maybe that's not exactly what you want to sign up for. Maybe you'd rather just continue leasing space and having your landlord take care of those things. So that's one aspect of the decision for that. Another is, how committed to this particular spot do you really want to be? Is that exactly where you want to be, and you want to be there forever, and you have long-term goals? This location is amazing and you don't want to lose it. Sure, you might want to buy, but otherwise leasing gives you the flexibility. So just a couple of thoughts there.
Perfect. That's great. And Eleanor, I believe you are back up and running. Again, technology happens. So the question at hand is leasing, commercial real estate purchasing, when to lease and when to buy. Do you have any additional thoughts to add?
Okay, first, can you all hear me? Yes, okay. And any delay? No delay, perfect. Okay, I would probably fall more in Brian's camp on this. I think I'm a huge believer in buying over leasing at the right time. I think it's, again, obviously you have to have cash, you have to have cash flow, you have to have all those pieces in place. And so my thoughts are, when I first talk with someone who is looking or wants to buy or debating the two, I say, let's talk with a banker, so Shannon yourself, or maybe an SBA specific lender. I know Banner does lending, SBA as well, but and have them open the kimono to the banker, because again, your banker is your best guide. They can tell you if you're ready to buy now, or if you're not, what steps do you need to take? What is that roadmap to get to being ready? So that's the first step. Two, the reason I'm always a big proponent of buying is I think ultimately it controls your destination. I hear what else leasing, which is true. However, when you own, you can control your costs. Don't have that increase in your lease every year. You also have a building. If you grow out of it, you can lease it. Yes, you become a landlord, but that's an asset. It's like a dividend-paying stock, long-term stock. It's appreciating, and you're also getting cash flow. Finally, there are a lot of tax benefits from owning a building. Depreciation, there's a lot of write-offs. If you own it and then lease it back to your company, there are additional write-offs for each group. I am not a CPA or an accountant, so I always recommend bringing in your quiver of professionals and talking to your accountant, talking to your banker. But I'm a big proponent of at least always looking at that as an option. And if it's something that is a goal long-term, sitting down with a banker and understanding how to make that happen and what you need to do.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's actually, I wanted to make one comment, but that's a great segue into, we're going to skip a couple of questions and jump down to the one about financial partners, because I think that that's a great plug there. One of the comments that I wanted to make, though, that oftentimes business owners don't consider when leasing versus purchasing, and this is something that we'll be discussing on the next series event, which will go over succession planning. But when you do have that property that you've purchased, that can potentially be your long-term retirement strategy, depending upon how much equity you build into the building itself, or that can be, again, just residual income for when you do retire and no longer are operating as the business owner. So, great comments, Eleanor. I definitely advocate for all of that. And like I said, we'll be talking about that a little bit on the succession planning event next month. But let's go ahead and jump down to the 7th question today, which again, I did post into the chat for everyone to view. At what point should you loop in other financial partners, which, as we saw at the last event, are most often considered your accountant, your attorney, and your banker. Eleanor touched on the banker and accountant perspective. Brian has mentioned your attorney and at what point you should engage with an attorney. So, I'd love to hear from you all on when you would recommend that conversation occur. Does that happen maybe before the client reaches out to you or after? And And additionally, should all of those key players be having the same conversations together and with you? So Kelsey, why don't we go ahead and start with you first?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that you should reach out to them today. I think you should be constantly networking to find those partners. If you haven't already, start now. Just start building relationships, grab coffee with them, ask them questions, and just start building that foundation for what could be a great partnership. And if you want to know them beforehand until you don't want to need them and then get to know some random person. And yeah, so on that note also, when you're working with a broker, you may ask them for recommendations, and we know plenty of those people, so we can also put you in touch with some that we've worked with that we would recommend and that we think are quality. So there's also that. I'd also network within your industry to find partners that other people that have similar businesses to you have used, because that could be very beneficial because they've already done it before.
Perfect. Brian?
I couldn't agree more. I like when that happens. Great minds think alike. We did not compare notes before this event, but early and often would be my answer, like Kelsey said, and I always recommend having 2 or 3 good ones, because, for example, you got your CPA, you got your lawyer, you got your, so on and so forth. Always think about having a general contractor by your side, but let's say you needed something done on a space that you found, just a little wall with a electrical outlet, and maybe we just need to move that sink over there. Just minor changes. Well, guess what? Not everyone's available to do that right away. So you might have a hard time when you sign that lease getting that work done quickly, and all of a sudden you just burned up the free rent we worked so hard to negotiate for you, and your occupancy is delayed. So having a couple of space planners, maybe a couple contractors that you're in touch with about workload is a very wise thing to be doing. And just real quick, back to the professionals in your circle. Really good professionals are really, really busy. And so you don't want to just send your lease to your lawyer that you haven't met or haven't talked to before and say, hey, I need this by the end of the week. Can you turn this around? They might not even respond to you. So giving them a heads up and saying, hey, as you're, getting, as you talk to them or just getting a coffee or something, hey, I'm expecting in 30 to 60 days, I'll probably have a lease document for you to review. Would you be available to turn that around for me fairly soon? And they can then say, hey, yeah, we'll get that to you in like 48 hours. So your expectations are managed versus whatever the expectation is going awry, basically. So, yep, having those relationships and touches with those close advisors that you're going to need through the whole process is very, very critical in my mind.
Perfect. Thank you. And we do have a question in the chat from Evan again. It's regarding insurance. The question is, I recently purchased a small mixed-use building in Portland. I reached out to my insurance broker and I'm having trouble getting a policy. At first, it was unoccupied, and then they said I didn't like that. So then I moved my home office there. They then said that the underwriter wouldn't do owner-occupied insurance. So I got a tenant and sent them the lease for proof, and now they say they need the tenant to certify the insurance that shows the owner as additional interest on the property. It's usually just hard to get coverage, or should I look up another insurance broker? I don't know if Eleanor, Brian, or Kelsey wants to answer this one, but I can actually answer this one because I'm on the banker side, and we oftentimes do have issues with insurance companies. I would say, Evan, definitely shop your commercial policy, because if you're trying to go with a State Farm who has had, let's say, your primary home insurance for years, they don't specialize in commercial insurance options. So figuring out what that looks like, but you likely do need a commercial policy if you do have a tenant. Additionally, your tenant should have insurance, and you should be listed on that policy as a loss payee in some capacity in the event that they burn your whole building down. You know, there's just a lot of nuances with that. If you find the right commercial insurance agent, they can talk you through those options. So again, it just depends on the space overall. Ben, and I'm happy to talk with you offline and make additional recommendations offline if you would like to. Eleanor, Kelsey, Brian, do you guys have anything additional to add on that?
I do, actually. Can you hear me? Just checking, because my computer says I'm muted, but my phone is on. I agree with everything that Shannon just said, Evan, and I would also, one, definitely shop around. Two, there's a difference between the insurance your tenant has where you are additionally insured and the insurance you need on your building. You need hazard insurance. Even if you were it's just an income property to you. If you're not there, but you're just leasing it out, you still need the hazard insurance. So if a tree falls on it, if a truck off the street runs into it, you are covered. Your tenant has what's called liability insurance, so that if someone comes to see them and trips, their insurance takes care of that. You are also additionally insured, so they also cover you in case that person tries to come after you. I mean, I'm not an attorney on this, I'm not an insurance broker on this, but I in my 12 years have never heard of the difficulty that you're experiencing right now. So I do think it might be an issue, unfortunately, with that insurance company, and I would definitely shop. There's a number of really good commercial insurers out here in the area, and I would talk with them, because I'm sorry that you're going through that, but it shouldn't be that difficult. So
that is correct. It should not be that difficult. I can speak from firsthand. I do have a rental property, and I had similar issues when I was trying to work with my previous, primary, just standard, auto and home insurance company, and I had to go a different avenue. So again, I totally understand where you're at on that one. It's just a matter of finding the right fit for your needs. Eleanor, did you have any additional comments or thoughts with regards to when to loop your financial partners in?
I think Brian and Kelsey summed it up really well. I don't really have much more. The earlier, the better, even if it's just giving people a heads up that this is what you're doing and that you're going to need to pull them in at some point. It just, as we all know, everyone, as Brian said really eloquently, everyone is busy, and it's really hard when somebody drops you. And some of these leases, especially in the office and the medical world, I mean, those can be 30-page leases. They are long documents. You don't necessarily want your attorney to go and try and rewrite them, but you want them to be able to read all the boilerplate to make sure you're protected throughout. And no one wants that with a 24-hour timeline. So the earlier you bring people in, the better. And also to have the conversation with those, especially on the attorney side, is, again, these leases are quite long, and some of them can be. And knowing what are the crucial issues that are most important to your business, those are the ones you're going to want to address in the lease with your attorney, and letting, some of the longer term, kind of more boilerplate. Again, it's just having, sorry, I'm kind of sidetracking. It is having that early conversation is important. Perfect.
Thank you. The next question, what is important to know about the market when considering how to move forward? Brian, why don't we start with you?
The market, that is another great question. So there's several components to our business. Being a successful real estate broker would be knowing the people in it, knowing the process, going through it, and knowing the market. So that's one of the three main primary pillars of this business. And the key to knowing the market is helping your clients be educated in understanding and what they're managing the expectations they have in the market. when I have a potential prospect call me and say, hey, I saw a building you have listed for sale, and how much is it? And I say it's $1 million, and they say, oh my gosh, that's too expensive. Well, it's not too expensive. It's what the market is. So rather than reacting to the market, our job is to get in front of our clients and help them understand what the market is. I mean, it's not like I'm, you know, a Wolverine or somebody and I could just wave a magic wand and reduce the price of the building for them to fit their budget. It's going forwards with it and helping them say, well, look, there's 3 other buildings for sale around it that are $1 million as well, and they're very comparable. So just more and more client education. Same with different aspects of our business, like lease renewals. Well, all my friends are getting, you know, 5 months free rent just because of COVID, and so therefore I should be getting that as well. Well, your friends probably, you know, didn't get that. They were just talking to you at some point, and sorry, I had a distraction. The phones are ringing. Turn off the phones. You know, what your friends say that they're doing isn't always accurate. So it's really good to get the whole picture of maybe what happened. I mean, they might have gotten 5 months free and signed another 10-year lease. So if you want to compare apples to apples, we need to also do that exact same thing in the exact same situation in that building with that landlord, which is probably highly unlikely. So every case is different.
Okay, perfect. Eleanor?
You know, that's a good segue. I would agree with, again, with Brian on, I think the thing that I noticed the most in the most recent years in the industrial market across the Portland metro area increased in probably 10 years, probably 40 to almost 50%, almost doubled. I mean, we went from 37 to 40-cent shell rates to now we're up at 60-cent shell rates, right? And for people who have a 5-year or 7-year lease and are coming out of that, that is massive, you know, shell shock. Like they go out and they look at the pricing and they can't believe how expensive it is, and just going out, and I think just educating, getting really educated, listening to your brokers, you know, asking for comps, comparables, what's out there, because often the market has changed, and that can be a little bit nerve-wracking when you're trying to do a business and then trying to move. And also the supply and demand, you know, again, that goes back to timing. If we're in a tight market with low supply and a high demand, again, that's a timing piece. You're going to want to be out much earlier because it's going to take that much longer to find a space and then the right space. So those are the two. I think, you know, understanding the monetary, where the market is monetarily, and then also where it is in supply and demand are important.
Perfect. Thank you. Kelsey, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Something that we haven't really touched on at all is just the current condition of the market with COVID, and particularly from the office standpoint. Something to know right now is just the flood of subleases that are hitting and kind of the effects on downtown, people moving to the suburbs. There's just a lot of movement right now. So there's a lot to think about and be aware of, and prices are kind of going down, at least in the office arena. So yeah, that I can't touch on it all. There's just a lot there. So just be aware that things are changing.
Perfect. I think, Bruce, you have a question?
Yeah, I want to get into that just for a moment. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion at Urban Land Institute and among various brokerage meetings about city center or the core of the region and the suburbs. And you represent a lot of different food groups of real estate, from industrial to office to retail, maybe mixed use, healthcare. And I would just like your thoughts, and obviously I'm representing a suburban community, but your thoughts in terms of what you see as the trends, maybe both COVID related, but maybe even looking a little bit beyond COVID. I don't know if anybody can do that. That might be too broad a question, but I thought I would just raise it for discussion.
That's a great question. I can step in for a second. So the healthcare world is booming. With no exception, every single client that we are working with is growing. They need more space. They need maybe a little less space in their waiting rooms. But overall, they need more space. They are at capacity. And I'm able to speak sort of in general terms because it's consistent throughout right now. From the 2,000 square foot dental tenant needing now 2,500 to 3,000 to the surgery center who's had 5,000 square feet and needs 15,000 square feet now. So we had also a nonprofit medical group sign a lease in October of last year. And so they took quite a bit of time permitting this. And by the time they started, COVID hit and they stopped everything. And I thought, you know, at the time they were just going to fold. They were just done. And instead they worked with their architect and grew another 5,000 square feet due to the new requirements, and actually expanded the space to 20,000 square feet. That's out in Gresham. So basically, I'm only speaking for healthcare, the healthcare sector, because essentially you still are going to have to go to the dentist. At least mine doesn't come to me. So, and that's really the case for most of your physicians out there. They still need space to see clients, see patients. Your endodontist or orthodontist is not going to come to you. So they need physical office space.
That's great. Yeah, I do think, I mean, COVID overall is changing the perspective of a lot of things. And, you know, Evan, I think you did comment in the chat at the very beginning of the session about also the perspective of doing like a pop-up holiday location. And, you know, right now with the state of what downtown Portland is, there are locations that may be coming from downtown Portland looking to do a spin-off pop-up location in, let's say, Sherwood or something to that capacity, just to, again, expand their market share. And a lot of times those companies, it's interesting and intriguing to see how well that new location does. And is it just a holiday thing, or is it going to be a long-term win? So thank you for the great questions. Does anyone else have any questions?
Can I just answer a little bit of what Bruce is looking at too? So it's interesting. From an industrial and also from an office perspective, and then from a suburb and a core perspective. So from the industrial perspective, the industrial market has weathered the COVID storm very well for a number of reasons. More people are buying at home. So you've got logistics companies that are actually maxed out. You've got that are over time. Amazon has been a huge footprint throughout the region. With like I think they've got 4 full, 800,000 or 1 million square feet in each distribution center and they're leasing more. From an office perspective, we all see what's happened with the office world. Offices are closing. The core downtown, I think, is suffering from a little bit more than just COVID, as we know. I think that is driving, maybe businesses to the suburbs. I do think the suburbs will benefit from this economic cycle, from the various things that are happening right now in downtown Portland. I'm a true optimist, and I think a lot of this is short term. I think COVID is ultimately going to be short term at some point. I think hopefully the protests will get some leeway, get those. I don't want to get political, but move forward there. I think the homeless problem is an issue. The city seems to be addressing that. I think Portland, in their defense, has done an amazing and remarkable job building affordable housing, but there's going to be a lag time. So ultimately, from that standpoint, right now are set up to do extremely well. I think we're seeing a trend both in industrial and in office moving back down the I-5 corridor, looking over at Clark County. So that's kind of my outlook. And with 2 cents to office, I know after working at home, and as we all have for 6 months, I actually really miss the office. There are benefits to being at home, but I miss the collaboration. I miss the conversations. I miss knowing what other people are working on. And I'm starting to see that trend on a greater level. I do think there'll be a massive shift maybe in the 8 to 5 piece. That might change where people have more alternative schedules, but I think you're going to see offices continue. I think the footprint might be a little smaller. You're going to see more overlap. Some people come in early, they leave early. Some people come in later, they leave later. But I don't see the office going away. That's my thought. Kelsey, I don't know if you've got any thoughts to that.
Yeah, I don't see the office going away either, but I definitely see it changing and adjusting for this. We're seeing a lot of like the hub and spoke model where people will or companies would have smaller offices like all around town so that you can go to the office that's closest to you. One of our clients they're exiting some space downtown, and they've created a reservation system that they're using for their other locations where they can, just sign up to have a desk at this other space that's closer to them now. So we're seeing that as a trend. There really have been big changes downtown. I hope it bounces back quickly, but I'm also kind of, concerned for sure. Like Union Bank just exited a bunch of floors in the Union Bank building, which is no longer named Union Bank. Like that's pretty big. And like the retail that's serving those buildings we're having a lot of issues there. And that's what drives people to want to be downtown is those sorts of amenities. Also, downtown is one of the most expensive places to have an office. So you're paying for that and not really getting to use the stuff. So really seeing the trends to the suburbs, and the suburbs are increasing their prices actually because they're ready for it. Cruiseway increased their asking rate by $2 a square foot already. So yeah.
That's definitely an interesting observation. And one of which, we saw this when, when companies headquartered more out in the suburb regions before, around the .com crisis and that type of era. And so it's interesting to see kind of that swinging pendulum going back and forth depending upon what the market does. And to the point, if the pricing in the suburbs tick up that potential 2%, what does that mean for downtown pricing too? So it's definitely upside for those suburb type areas like Sherwood, and more to come, I think, over the next 12 to 18 months for downtown Portland and what that looks like. Thank you again for the great question, Bruce. Oh, yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Something Kelsey said about the hub and spoke kind of concept. When you say hub and spoke, referring to the spokes, not the hub, are you referring to like the shared workspace, like a WeWorks kind of a situation, or are they renting individual offices that are their own and are closed when they're not in them? And I guess to that point, and this can be for any of you, what do you see in this shared workspace concept? Is that a flash in the pan, or is this something that will stay around for a while? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was speaking to groups that are large enough that they actually do have their own offices kind of around town and then one main office, but it could also certainly be like what you said, where they have a main hub and then co-working for their people wherever they want to go that's close to them or something like that. as far as co-working, my office is actually in central office. Our Cressa team has taken a space there and we love it. We have seen not as many people there, but people are starting to come back. And I actually have a group that's touring this coming week that is looking at co-working. And I think that right now, if your lease is coming up, there are some groups that are kind of considering just doing co-working as a flexible option because they're not sure what they want to do. So I think it's here to stay.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next question, what should a business owner have prepared when they engage a commercial real estate broker's services? You know, again, just overall, what should they have prepared? Does that mean financials or an idea of what the space looks like? How much should they have prepared in advance before they call you? Eleanor, why don't we start with you?
I think going back to some of the things we've touched on, and again, it's some of that planning, just having some of that planning pre-thought out, so that when they sit down with the broker, more information will come out, but at least they can start the discussion, what they want, what their timing is, what the requirement is. Having financials financials, for people who don't know when we say that, because it is a very blanket statement, it's typical, landlords will want to see some sort of financial statement on your company, and it typically comes in a 2 to 3 year tax history. So you just can submit your company's IRS tax report to that landlord, and what they're looking for is primarily things like what you paid in, what you're currently paying in rent. You know, to understand, you know, is this a lateral move rent-wise? If it's a larger rent-wise move, you know, is your company growing? I think a lot of people get very nervous when a broker says, well, you're going to need to show your financials, but that's what they're looking for, or an operating statement, profit and loss statement, something that just shows that you're legitimate, that you're making money, that you've got a business plan. A business plan, if you're a startup or if you're moving out of your garage, that's a really important document too. It doesn't have to be a 30-page document, but just again shows how you're planning to grow your business in order to fill that space. Landlords are just looking for security in the risk they're taking on with you as a tenant, just like you're looking for the security of a new location. And so I think those are the two big things I would put out there.
Okay, thank you. How about Brian?
Yeah, Eleanor said very, very well, and sort of the technical pieces of what landlords are going to be looking for. In addition, landlords are, especially today, a little bit nervous. They are looking for security more so than ever before. So while the market's maybe a little softer for a tenant to maybe get a little extra free rent on the front end or what have you, landlords are really tightening up when it comes to personal guarantees and having their new tenants. You know, they don't, you know, tenants is like, well, I set up my LLC so that I don't have to be on the hook. Well, no, you're going to have to sign as an individual still. You can't just, you know, form an LLC that's worth nothing and then hope that the landlord's going to invest a lot of money into your space. But again, back to the medical sector, I mean, we are looking at 10, sometimes 15-year leases. So that involves a ton of planning and preparing for being vested in a certain space for a very long time. So we just want to make sure our ducks are really in a row. And then we're very transparent about what the landlord's going to need. I know that, like, if we're entering a new relationship, could be hard for some brokers to say, well, you know, you're going to have to send all your, you know, personal financial statements and tax returns. And they're like, oh my gosh, you know, we just met. But that would be better having that conversation on the front end than when you get the lease and the landlord's like, oh, by the way, we need to look at your all your financial statements, and catch the tenant off guard. And they say, oh my gosh, my CPA has a deadline, you know, today. He said he can't get them to me for another 3 weeks. So, I mean, we're very comfortable about asking our questions to our clients. on the front end so that, you know, they're prepared. And I mean, like I said, our process is probably 6 months to 24 months long. So if by the end of the transaction that, you know, my client's not running around with me, calling me like text or something, I mean, I would be shocked. You know, we're pretty close by then. So we want to get to that level where it's not going to be awkward if I ask, you know, by the way, your spouse might have to guarantee this, or you're going to have to come up with an extra deposit in order to make this deal work. Versus, you know, this thing spiraling out of control and then having to pick up all the pieces and then start over. That's an exhausting effort if you fail a deal in this market.
Okay, great. Kelsey, is there anything else that a client should have prepared in advance?
They touched on a lot. I would just say that you should have your business goals kind of ready, top of mind, have an idea of what you're looking for. Just think about it before you get started, and, you know, have your team within your company form sort of like, are you going to involve anyone else in this decision, or is it really going to be just you that's leading the charge? We'd recommend probably like 1 or 2 other people. Don't get 10 people, because too many cooks in the kitchen complicates things. But it might be nice to have like your CFO involved for the financial aspect, and et cetera, stuff like that. Just think through it before you start.
That's great. You know, just another kind of comment to that. I recently was working with a newer business. There was a startup in particular, and they had identified a place to lease, and they were on the medical side. They were going to need to do TIs to build out the property, and then COVID hit. And so the scope of the build out completely changed due to the fact of COVID and what, you know, how many people can be in a room or a waiting room, and how many people have to have dedicated spaces. And they still moved forward with that property, but the plans and the final outcome of the space looked completely different. And now they actually are continuing half of their business virtually and remotely, and doing more in home care, and so and in home visits. So it is really interesting. And, you know, we've talked about it in some of the other events that we've done with the chamber, but having a plan and being okay with adapting that plan and changing that plan is always, and being okay with that and taking the recommendation and advice of your advisors that you have, which very much includes your commercial broker. Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any questions at this time before we move on? Go ahead, Eleanor.
This is not really quite to the point, the question you asked, but it's just top of mind, and I want to put it out there for people who are looking for space. Is, again, always good to look back at if you're in a current space, look back at your current lease, but also understand the type of lease you have, whether it's a triple net, a modified gross, a full service, because all of those are, your broker can tell you the difference between those. But what you want to make sure is that the lease rate you're looking at, is that what you're going to be paying every month, or are there additional charges there? And then year over year, what is that increase going to be above and beyond just the rent, the base rent increase? You know, even in office, it's a full service, means everything's included in that price. There is going to be a clause that says the landlord can pass through a percentage of increases that the building itself incurs. And again, a good broker will help you navigate that, what that cap, you know, if you can put a cap on it, if you can somehow protect yourself. But I think with small businesses more so than large companies, that's the pain that can hurt, is down the road, you're in a lease for a couple of years, all of a sudden the expenses can get quite expensive, and that's getting passed to you. So it's really being prepared long-term for your lease. And I just want to put that out there. It doesn't fall into any of these categories, but it's been sitting in the back of my mind as a pertinent piece for small businesses.
That is a really good point. Evan, I saw you have a question. I do want to ask Eleanor a follow-up question though, real quick before we go to you. Eleanor, can you share with us what triple net means and why that might be important?
Sure. So triple net, you will see, and I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have it in medical as well and in retail and less so in office, they're called 3 nets. And the first net is the property tax for the building. The second one is the property insurance. Now this kind of goes to Evan's point of, this is the insurance that the owner is carrying, not the liability insurance that the tenant's carrying. And then any common area maintenance or maintenance on the building over the term of the lease. All of those can be passed back to the tenant, either in a prorated form, meaning if you're in a multi-tenant building, you're paying per square footage of what you're occupying, or if you're in a single tenant building, you're paying for all of it, back to you from the landlord. All of those will likely increase year over year. You know, if there's a landscaping company, likely they're going to increase 3%. Taxes, property taxes only go up. And so it's really good to understand what that cost is to, and add that to your base rent, because the base rent that's being marketed is just what the landlord's rent is. It's not, then you'll have these, you know, GM, modified gross, or triple net after that. So that's kind of a rough education on it. And your broker can tell you more and get you down in the weeds on it.
Perfect. Thank you. Evan, why don't you go ahead with your question?
Thanks. I recently purchased a building, and so now, after being a tenant for several years, I'm in the position of being a landlord. And we've talked a lot about leasing, and so I was able to get out of a 5-year lease in the core of downtown recently. I sold my business and was lucky that the new owner took over the lease for me. And so after going through the process of not being able to pay a lease break fee like I would in a traditional residential lease, I am now in the position of trying to rent my property, and I don't have a broker yet. I just put up a sign in the window and got a lot of interest. I'm trying to price high, and my strategy is to kind of offer the opposite of what Brian was talking about. Is I want to do a 3 to 6 month lease, and I want to offer people a lease break fee in my commercial lease so that they can get out of it if they don't want to. My perspective as a landlord is that in a shorter period of time, I'll be able to charge more money for the building, and so I would rather have it turn over sooner. And then also I'd like to be able to do different things with the building in 6 months. So have you heard of a lease break fee in a commercial structure? And also, I heard the timeline about it might taking several months, but I'd like to have a tenant in there by the 1st of next month and for the holiday season, and do maybe a pop-up retail store. So I know it's long-winded, but I'm interested in learning more about really short-term temporary leases.
I can speak to that if you want me to jump in, or okay, I'll jump in. Evan, first of all, what type of building is your building?
It's mixed-use property. It's a very small 600 square foot, single story cinder block building. It is a little complicated, and this is, I got private financing, and this is a perfect reason why you should go through a professional broker, is because it was hard for me to do all my due diligence during COVID, and so I ended up purchasing the property because I thought it was a good deal. But it's zoned mixed use, was most recently used for commercial, but technically the building permitting was last permitted as a residential structure, and it was turned into a house at one point in time and then back into an office without going through that permitting. So I might be having to do a change of occupancy permitting process. And so I'm also not sure about how that might be structured in the lease, especially if I might try to change the zoning and building occupancy over the next 6 month period in which they are occupying the building.
That's a lot. Yeah, no, that's definitely a large bucket of things. I think my biggest recommendation, because it's small and you want to do short-term leases, it would be hard to engage a commercial broker, because our structure is very different. Although, we're happy to advise you or give you some ideas. I would probably advise an attorney for you to find, if you're not working with an attorney, to find a good real estate attorney, one you'd like to work with, one that's in your budget, to help you navigate some of this, and also to get you a really solid lease. And whether it's there's nothing wrong with wanting to do short-term leases. I think why most landlords steer away from short-term leases is the downtime, meaning, between tenants, or depending on the type of building, the infrastructure costs to re-tenant. That's very expensive, right? So and then most tenants, the cost to move is quite expensive. So they don't want to do a one-year lease. They want security as well. So those are kind of the areas that we see. Your building is much smaller. It probably serves very well to a pop-up use for the holidays. And then in the new year, looking maybe at a 1 year, whatever works for you, looking at that tenant and knowing that you're going to, if you're really determined on a 6-month lease, you're going to have a smaller menu of tenants, because some are looking for, retail wants long-term. They want to establish a name, a brand, foot traffic. But I think out of the gate, I would probably start building my quiver, even though it's a small property, of a CPA, an attorney. You can reach out to some commercial real estate brokers. I'm sure, we would be happy to give you 30 minutes of our time to talk about some of the things you might want to think about as you work with the city. But you definitely got your arms full there. So and not knowing exactly what the property is, I don't want to get too into it, but that would be my recommendation on some of those. But talk with an attorney about a lease.
Definitely. Kelsey or Brian, do you have anything to add for Evan?
Yeah, sure. What kind of user are you looking for? I'm just trying to think about that.
Well, I've had, I had my sign in the window for a week and got like 30 phone calls, and most of them were tattoo studios, people that wanted to like sell hand lotion or manufacture hand lotion. I have, it has a large parking lot, and so I have people that want to start an urban farm in the parking lot. And it was originally a barber shop, but was most recently a tax preparer's office.
Very cool. Yeah, I was just curious about that. So, and you're really into the 6-month thing because you think that then you can do a higher rate?
So it gets more and more complicated. I kind of want to start a bar there and then have food cart pod in the parking lot, and then would also lease, to 8 different food cart pods in the parking lot, would serve beer for an outdoor heated beer patio, because over the next few years, there's going to be a shortage of heated outdoor dining spots. And so I want to both lease part of the building, occupy it. I would lease it from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. to a tattoo studio. I would serve beer from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. myself and keep the money. And then I would also get the rent money from all the food carts.
Sweet.
It sounds like a really fun Portland space. Like that sounds fun. I would also recommend too, you mentioned rezoning, only knowing enough to be very dangerous on the banker side. If it is mixed use, you don't necessarily have to change the zoning if it's already mixed use. You don't need to necessarily convert it into restaurant or food cart or whatever, because you don't necessarily have to go through those steps permanently since it's already mixed use. That's definitely something to check with, again, an attorney on. But I suspect, you don't, from what I've seen on the lending side, when we are lending to mixed use properties, they can continue to remain mixed use without rezoning it. So for what that's worth. And that may also change long term. If you do rezone it, that may also tie your hands long term for what you're able to do to the property. So before you change anything, you should definitely, take that into consideration.
Evan's question also brings up the subject of system development charges, and I was curious, just in general, maybe with his situation, but just in general, how, as brokers in the commercial real estate world, how do the SDCs impact you, and what are your clients, what are your recommendations, and what do you tell your clients? I'm sure that comes up, and a lot of times it's probably a big surprise the cost of some of those SDCs? Does that impact your business at all? Just curious.
I'll take that. That is welcome to my world. Medical triggers a lot of SDCs, as would anyone doing tenant improvements that adds plumbing fixtures or changing the use, if we're talking about other permitting type fees. And that is part of the education process when we're talking about budgeting for tenant improvements. Again, my clients are used to fairly extensive, expensive tenant improvements. So we're talking $100 a square foot up to $300 a square foot just for the interior build out. So in that, we kind of break it down as to what are your soft costs, meaning do you need an architect, and do you need, even I put legal fees in there and just rough budget numbers, so that they can start to think about, okay, let's say my hard cost budget is $100 per square foot. How much are we going to spend on SDCs or system development charges or traffic impact fees and on and on and on, basically lumping it into permitting fees. And that's a pretty substantial part of that budget that we want to help the client understand now versus when the contractor spits out their, let's just call it a ROM or a budget number and says, your cost is $100,000. Oh, by the way, you have 30,000 additional permitting charges, and you don't want your client's jaw to drop at that point, and you might lose the deal right there. So it's really important to have that as part of the early conversation, because let's be honest, like how many people go around at their cocktail parties talking about SDCs? I mean, nobody knows what it is. So yeah, definitely enlightenment period, and that's a real part of the conversation where we stop and make sure the client understands what those are for. And that could actually affect what properties we're searching for. If they say, I can't afford $30,000 just to go to nothing, basically. Well, we might have to shop for a space that's already ready for you to go, with the exception of flooring and paint, and you can move in. That would help you avoid those fees.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Bruce, do you have another question?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Corey. And it's from my perspective here at the city of Sherwood, we want to make sure that we're, I'm, for example, working with a food user that's looking at a space in Old Town Sherwood. We want to make sure one of the very first things we talk about is make sure, as you describe your project, that we get some estimates on what those SDCs and then the Washington County transportation tax would be on the particular project, because we don't want anyone to be surprised, because going down, and I know this doesn't happen 100%. You know that, and we know that, but that's really what we're trying to do early on, because those fees can really, if you're not used to it, because most of the folks that are looking at a food use in Old Town Sherwood, they're not developers, they're entrepreneurs. We want to encourage the entrepreneurs, but we don't want to take them down a path where they're shocked by what costs they might find. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm going to say it doesn't work 100% of the time here, but that's really what we're trying to do.
Perfect. So with that, that's all of the questions that we had prepared in advance for the panelists today. Does anyone else have any final questions, thoughts, or any, again, lingering just comments that they wanted to ask or share? Feel free to utilize the chat or just unmute yourself. Bruce?
Well, I'm going to make sure the businesses get to ask the questions, so I'll hold for a second, see if anybody from the business side wants to ask.
Perfect.
Hearing none. So some of you represent end user companies, your tenant reps, and some of you represent the property owners. So how do you balance providing guidance so that I understand how it works with the tenant rep, but let's say with those who represent the property owner, how do you balance the kind of advice that you're giving to the prospective tenant that might be looking at space if you're not actually representing the tenant? I mean, maybe that's not a clear question, but I thought I'd try to see if I could get some discussion on what that balance might be of providing advice to the prospective tenant versus when you're working for the landlord.
I can start that unless you're ready, Brian.
Oh, it's just a fantastic question. Go ahead.
Okay, so well, my thought is, I think at a high level, brokers, yes, we're representing one side, but ultimately our goal is a win-win for everyone. You know, you want the long-term relationship. That only comes from helping people's businesses find the right locations that they thrive. The landlord also wants the same thing. I mean, I think it's very easy to look at, sometimes when we have these conversations or when you're in the heat of it, to look at an us, them, you know, it's me against the landlord, but ultimately it's a marriage. You know, the landlord wants a good tenant, the tenant wants a good landlord, and everyone wants to be happy in the property. And so I think from my point of view, and I do kind of a 50-50, I end up representing a number of buyers and tenants as well as landlords and sellers, is you really are trying to match up the right property with the right tenant, right? And Brian hit on it earlier about expectations. It's setting expectations early on with each group, with the landlord and with the tenant. You know, and talking through what each side needs. And there's no perfect formula. Every deal is different. But I think the more transparency that brokers provide to both landlord and tenant, and the more due diligence everyone does on the space, then everyone comes out as a win-win. And that's the way I try and approach it, and just looking at how to fill the need of both people. And that's what brokers do. We bridge that gap. So that's how I look at it. Brian, it's to you.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, Kelsey doesn't have to really deal with this as much. She's advocating for a tenant side, which is awesome. I think in our business, you can do both. So if you're a landlord rep or owner rep, and you're advising them on lease rates, you're going to have to do that in a, like Eleanor said, a transparent way that's a reflection of what's going on in the market. And you're going to establish a price. And you're going to also expect that the tenant is going to come along and offer you lower than that, most likely, because they have a broker advocating for their value and why the market would be a little less. So essentially, it's in everyone's best interest to work together. And if the landlord's, asking $32 a square foot, and the tenant rep broker comes in and offers 30, I mean, this is how the business works. We negotiate, and that's one of the maybe 100 pieces that we negotiate, but maybe we agree that $31 is where it should be. And so that's kind of the whole game of negotiation, which probably could be a whole nother 2-hour discussion.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any additional questions or comments to add today? No? All right, well, with that, thank you again for joining us today, and thank you to the Sherwood Chamber for hosting us. It's been great to participate in this wonderful panel discussion of commercial real estate brokers and what to think about as you're navigating your next steps for your business. Corey, will our contact information be available online following this in the event that anybody does want to follow up?
Yeah, so when I put the link up on the website for the recording, I'll add everyone's contact information people can reach out and follow up as they would like.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining today. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Yeah, and I'll just add our thanks from the chamber and the city. It looks like Bruce had to step away for a second, but this was a great conversation. I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people that are looking to grow and move and you know, whatever their goals are. So really appreciate everybody's time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and then everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thanks, everyone.